don't like doing all the talking. And I've been told to volunteer people to answer questions. So if you are a little bit shy about raising your hand, don't be surprised, I guess, if I throw this at you. I've been told to throw this. Oh, is it not still sharing? Should still be sharing. Let's see.
Oh, yeah, I think it should be.
Yeah, right there. Okay. All right. So actually, because I was listening to the updates, I'm a little bit curious because there was not a, and actually I'll throw up my slide, so a little bit about me, so you all can get to know me while I'm asking some questions. No, it's all right. Where do I get to that at? Oh, is it behind this screen?
Yeah.
It's off screen. There we go. No, see, it's, where's that coming from?
I assume it's from our.
Yeah, because this is my second screen. See, that's on your, because there's my second screen, and this is the primary screen.
That's right. Oh, wait. That's interesting.
Yeah, let me do this. Yeah. Oh, there we go. I found it. It's hiding down here. Except it's hiding off on, there we go. Go. All right, let's try that again. There we go. All right, so a little bit about me. And then how do we get rid of the stuff at the top there? Let's see. Let's see. Okay. All right, good deal. All right. So a little bit about me, and for those of you that get the reference, this is my NASCAR slide. So I have been at Microsoft 22 and a half years. I am UF alumni. So I graduated from this building, from BSCE in 95. Interesting fact is that if you all know Dr. Sani, who I guess a professor emeritus and was the chair here before the current chair, he's my neighbor, and was actually taught one of my favorite classes. So he taught data structures. But the program that I went through back then was a combination of computer science and EE. And I think there's one of the newer programs now almost mirrors the program that I took back when I graduated from here. I do guest lecture over here. The last guest lecture that I gave at UF was actually over at the retail center over in the business college on machine learning, AI, and advanced analytics, which is an area that I love to talk about. So spoiler, we will talk a little bit about AI today in the context of cybersecurity. Let's see, what have I done at Microsoft? So when I joined Microsoft, I joined in services, which meant I was and my background prior to joining Microsoft was I was a developer. Was never really good at building user interfaces. So don't ask me to design GUIs for you, but I was a great low-level systems programmer. So that's what I did. And I did that for about 4.5, 5 years at Microsoft. I've had a variety of roles since then. I used to run, and actually, let me ask a question. How many of you went to a Microsoft store before they closed? Most of the big ones, okay. So I launched the first Microsoft store in 2009. If you look me up, you'll see that I was billed as the chief architect for the Microsoft stores. So a lot of technology. I had a lot of technology fun with that, but also a lot of pain. People like Bill Gates, Steve Ballmer, Ray Ozzie, if you know who that is, showing up on the first store opening and working 20-hour days for about 3 weeks prior to that opening. And I did that for a number of years, and that was probably the last time that I had a day-to-day operational role that involved security. So I was responsible for some of our SecOps teams. I was responsible for our PCI SOC and our PCI ROC, which was our report on compliance that we had to do every year. Big focus around PII compliance. Microsoft is obviously, maybe it's not obvious, but we've got the largest consumer directory in the world when we start thinking about identity providers. So that bears a lot of responsibility, and we leverage that quite heavily in the stores. And then as you can see up there, I've got some of my certifications. So my day job doesn't technically require me to carry certifications, but I am still an engineer. And many of you will realize, I mean, if you stay in development, if you stay in engineering, if you stay in, you know, the cybersecurity side for your entire career, you might have a different experience than I do, but I've progressively gone up into leadership positions at Microsoft, but I still like to be an engineer at the end of the day. So that affords me a lot of fun. I do have a ISC squared certification up there, which honestly, I just took that for the fun of it. Didn't study, went down, took the exam, said, can I pass this? And that was fun. So I've got my cybersecurity certification up there. But anyway, so really today, and I encourage questions, but I wanted to give you a little bit of background on myself, because where I spend most of my time now is working with executives, technology executives, and really engineering teams at a lot of these companies that you see up here. I don't work with all of them right now. Some of those I work with historically, but you probably recognize a lot of the brands up there and the companies that I work with. I've been involved with incidents. I've been involved with major events. Hate to say it, but I've watched, you know, ransomware and other things happen that were completely avoidable. We'll talk a little bit about that today. But you know, I encourage questions, because my background has afforded me some really unique opportunities to work with a lot of big companies, some of which you may work with someday. You know, you'll learn a lot by having the opportunity to work with a lot of different companies, because it gives you a different perspective, especially with how different companies think about IT, how they think about security, and how they think about engineering as a whole. So I have a question for the group, though. So I heard the updates and you all talking about competitions and things. So just, I'm really curious, because again, we didn't have a UF SIT group when I was here. What does one of these contests look like when you all go to it?
So this is a competition that's essentially placing our students in charge of making, you know, the response for the team.
Yep.
The typical scenario is like, oh, this company just like fired all these people, all the IT department, all the security department, and you guys are here for the breach. There's been a breach, or your network has been compromised in some fashion or another, and you have to basically get tossed in there and fend for yourselves against this, you know, huge team of like professional people from the military, people from like consulting companies, all sorts of stuff that are the red team, trying to take down your services that are required for the company, which are used to score, or at least they're part of the scoring for your team. So a big part of it is keeping these required services up and running while facing an ongoing attack by these crazy professional, like wild red team.
Okay. So most of these ethical hackers that you're going up against? Yeah.
They do a lot of, they'll do stuff like, hey guys, here's a score checking script that you have to install on your machine, but it'll be like a red team guy.
Yeah. Okay.
And to install malware and backdoors.
So you have phishing attacks and all kinds of other exploits that they're not just technical exploits, but social engineering that they're trying to leverage against you. Okay.
One of the red teamers, they did some talk, and they said that this competition is our chance as ethical hackers to no longer be ethical.
Yeah.
They just try everything.
Yeah.
They can. They love to mess with people.
Yeah.
It seems pretty chaotic.
I'm assuming these are on sandbox networks. Okay. That's pretty cool. Yeah, I would have had a lot of fun doing that back in the day. Okay, so all right, well, let's get into this then. And again, if I wasn't quite sure, what would be super exciting to you all today. So, I'm going to keep things more at a strategy level. But if you've got technical questions and you want to dig down deep into some of the conversation, provided we've got time, I'm happy to go there. But I am going to give you somewhat of a Microsoft perspective on cybersecurity. And this is not like a product talk or anything like that. But what you all probably don't realize is that Microsoft's cyber defense organization is probably one of the largest, and I can give you some numbers around that. But we work closely with the NSA, we work closely with the FBI, we work closely with governments of most major countries, and I'm going to show you some of the numbers and things that we report on, and some of the things that we've seen in the last couple of years, and then we're going to talk a little bit about when you think about your competitions that you're doing, and some of the things that I see, unfortunately, when I go in, is there's when you're working for companies, it's and I don't know if you all have classes on these things or you talk about these things, but what you generally find when it comes to security spend is a lot of companies still see security as a necessary evil. Okay, and I say necessary evil when it comes to budget. Right. And that usually means that what's considered acceptable risk by a board is really not acceptable risk. It's just what they're willing to spend. And it usually takes an incident before they're willing to spend money. Okay. So there's like, how do you work within that when you've got, great ideas and you see the problems, but, you've got one hand tied behind your back in terms of what you're able to do. It can be very frustrating. Yeah.
Oh yeah, let's show up tomorrow and start asking him how to secure like an Amazon or like an Amazon IAM.
Yeah, I mean, I had, and it's one of the companies that's up on that list. I got a 911 yesterday because they had somebody that moved out of role and they wanted to know how. They said, well, this user's got global admin rights to all these things in the cloud. How do we move them without, impacting services? Really? You hadn't planned for that, right? I mean, seriously, you hadn't planned for that in advance. And these are big companies. I mean, these are companies that have got, $100 million annual IT budgets, right? And you see basic stuff like this, which can be very frustrating, especially when you're on the receiving end of the problem. So let's jump into this. So I'm going to ask a couple questions first. So curious from the group, technical innovations that have the greatest potential to first defend against bad actors. Okay, so this is a current question, right? So I'm curious what you all are learning, and a lot of this isn't going to be in the classroom, because if you're like me, I know you do a lot of stuff outside the classroom, obviously. But anybody want to volunteer when we think about current technical innovations? Yep. Okay. Okay. Right. Okay.
We're looking at proper like bridge network packet capture, sort of like wrapper for Wireshark that implements, if I'm not mistaken, some form of AI to tag packets based on their level of suspicion or their what type of action they're involved in.
Okay. Right now, how about enabling bad actors?
Even with two-factor authentication, you hear about attacks where people just spam two-factor at like 3 a.m. and people wake up at the, you know, in the middle of their sleep and they say, oh, what is this, whatever, and they just click accept.
Right.
So they don't even have to send an email, just click a button. Potentially makes it easier to, I know a few big breaches happened a couple of years ago, and people found out, the people who did it, they were like 16-year-olds. They breached major companies.
I'm sure this happening at UF, like a bomb.
Oh, I heard it. I can imagine anything, any development can be used for both.
Yep. Okay. I was wondering if anybody would say that, because it really is. It's true. It works both ways. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yep. And we're actually going to talk a little bit about that too. Just things as a service. Now, next question: why should you assume breach? Y'all heard this one before? Okay. So why should you assume breach?
Because you don't want to do that.
Okay. And I'm gonna give you a perspective on this, which challenges something one of you have already said, but we'll get to that in a few minutes. Okay. So we'll start off with a few headlines, and I had to throw the UF Health one in there. So that's not the most recent, but the other three are recent. So estimated 1.75 trillion just on cybersecurity spend by 2025. That's a lot of money. How many of you all followed Southwest? How many of you all were stuck on a Southwest flight in December because when things got grounded? Anybody? Yeah. Okay. So did you see that headline that it only took about 2 weeks? The CEO came out and said, "Oh, we're going to spend $1 billion to fix all of our systems," right? So what do we call that in the industry? We call that retiring technical debt, right? But you have to ask yourself the question. And one of my peers actually covers Southwest Airlines. Okay. By the way, they're a big AWS customer. Okay. But you have to ask yourself, how do you end up saddled with $1 billion of technical debt at an airline? And I asked myself, when I saw that, I said, well, hopefully they don't allow that much debt to to pile up in their airline or the airplane maintenance too. So hopefully those are different groups. And then you look over there, and that's actually from the latest budget proposal that just came out. How much just the U.S. government's planning on spending on IT security over the next year? I mean, it's an insane amount of money. So it's a lot of money. So why do we still have a problem? Anybody want to take a stab at it? Okay. Anybody else? No. Yeah. Mm-hmm. People that like to put their laptop in their desk at 4:30 and go home. I got a lot of those I work with. Yeah.
Global networking. I think that the Southwest Airlines was a result of that. Standard was like ancient, but it was still a standard, so everyone used it.
It was software made by GE that hadn't been updated in years. Yeah. Yeah. So, and it's, I think this ties into, I like the, I had to throw the comic in here just for the heck of it, but, a lot of it's insider risk, right? So 25% of all data breaches is insider risk. I will tell you that, in spite of everything that, we talk about, best practices, turnover in the industry. I've got customers that still say, I can't retire that system or upgrade that server because I don't know how to move the software. Right. So think about that problem, right? So now it's all about compensating controls. It's, well, the best thing to do is to upgrade the server, but I can't do it because the person that wrote the software, the company that wrote the software doesn't support something newer. So now I got to figure out, how to build compensating controls around that. So we get back to protecting the network, protecting the machine. I'm actually friends with the chief security officer of Disney, and he brought in, I was down in Orlando for a meeting, and he brought in some people from the Imagineering team in California, Burbank. And we were talking about ride control systems. Now, this is a little bit of a dated statement, so it's probably dated about 5 or 6 years ago. But anybody want to guess what the Dumbo ride in Disney ran on 6, 7 years ago?
I think you already told us about that.
Yeah, okay, so you can't answer if I told you that, yeah. Windows 95. Yeah, Windows 95. Yeah. So when they design things with a major air gap in the system. They're not designed to be online. They're not designed to be patched. They're not designed to be updated. They're not designed to be accessed, okay? Because they're designed to be in service for 25 years. So ride control systems have about a 25-year lifespan. And that was just the model that they designed things. So you can imagine, the risk to their insider risk, because it's the only thing they look at, right? External risk is very minimal because these systems aren't connected, right? So it's all about insider risk management, physical control systems, right? How much do you all talk about those types of things? When we get away from, the pure IT side of it, when you start getting into physical controls, logical controls, things of that sort. You all get into those a little bit? Okay. Mm-hmm.
Supposedly.
It sounds like a wild competition. Okay, so if you were to ask me, what I think one of the biggest problems is this one here. Okay, so I'll let you take that one in for a minute. Okay, it's about human error. I used to make a joke that, Visual Basic was the worst thing for the world because it allowed non-engineers and non-developers to write code, right? And, in some respects, this is sort of the state of our cybersecurity industry right now, okay? I mean, there's a lot of people that, they look at security through a very narrow lens. They don't understand really the problem statement outside of the domain of what they focus on. And that to me is that's Dave on the right there, okay? Hey, anybody know what this is? And I'm going to draw a parallel to the Disney. Yeah. Well, they're definitely containers.
Some air gap, something.
Okay. Anybody else? That's an Azure data center. Okay. Now, this is actually one of our Gen 4 data centers. One of our regions up in Virginia, those containers are actually sitting outside. So if you were to fly over, as a matter of fact, it's something, please don't do it now, but if you go look later, go outside, go look at, Bing Maps, Google Maps, whatever you want to look at. Go look at the satellite maps around Ashburn, Virginia, and you'll see 100 acres or more of containers stacked side by side outside. That's an Azure data center. Okay. The reason I show you this is I went into, the last data center I went into was up in Chicago, and it covered about 50 acres. It was multiple floors. When I went out back, there were 12-cylinder diesel generators and containers that were about 30 feet off the ground. There was about 50,000 gallons of diesel that was stored underground. It was connected to 2 major grids that were coming in from different directions. And there was probably about 5 people that I saw at the entire data center, okay? Nobody at the data center actually has access to the servers. I mean, it is completely, there is a major air gap when we talk about physical controls, there's a major air gap between the people that are actually at the data center allowing people in and those that are out. When I walked into the data center, I had to stand in a tube, and they don't tell you what it does, but I'll tell you what it does. First, it blew air across me. It weighed me. So don't ask to go to the bathroom while you're in the data center because you'll get flagged on the way out. Okay. Sorry to be, colorful about it, but it's the truth. Because what they're looking for are you carrying things out, you bringing things in that you don't come out with, and also harmful chemicals or things that you may have on your body, which is what they're doing when they blow air across you. Okay. But there's literally nobody in the data center. And what they do is the servers that are sitting in these containers and the racks inside these look very similar to what you would think of as a classical data center. We wait until we get to about 30% failure in the container, and then they just swap the container out. They never go in and service servers. Okay. So this, and the reason I'm talking about this is because when we think about how complex security has become, and the physical control side of this is the only way that we can manage this at scale like this. And that applies to GCP, it applies to AWS, it applies to Microsoft. As a matter of fact, we're even taking it a step further. How many of you saw this project? You know what this is? Yeah. Yeah. So this is an underwater data center. Okay. And part of the reason for this is cooling, right? It's, can you put servers underwater and take advantage of natural cooling? But it also means it's going to be very difficult for people to get to the servers, right? And that's the idea. Okay. All right, let's start getting into some fun stuff here. So by the numbers. So anybody want to take a stab at how many? Okay, so first of all, this is July through June of 21. Okay, how many email threats we blocked in a year? And actually, I think the first, that may be the first one that I uncover here. Why don't we just go through any idea on the email threats? Okay. All right. I hope not, but how about identity threats blocked? Okay. Well, y'all, if you go, was it Price is Right? I think you all would probably not win this one, but I'll give you a hint. Endpoint signals analyzed daily. You all are closer on that one. Okay. All right. I'll show you some of the numbers here. So we analyze 43 trillion synthetic signals a day. Okay. That's a lot. Okay. When we look at how many engineers, researchers, and data scientists that we have on the cybersecurity side, it's about 8,500. Email threats blocked, 37 billion. So you're a little high on that one. Because honestly, actors have gotten a little more targeted with email threats just because of how sophisticated a lot of the tools have gotten around email scanning, phishing detection, URL reputation, those sorts of things. 34.7 billion identity threats blocked. We're going to talk a little bit about identity because I think my point of view is that's a big problem right now. 2.5 billion signals analyzed daily. Okay. Now, where do you think a lot of these signals are coming from? Any idea? I'm sorry. Yeah. So not country, but what devices are these signals coming from? Yeah. This is coming from every single Windows endpoint that's out there, and also any device that's running Defender endpoint protection. Okay. Which I've been in our cybersecurity center, and we have, you all would probably fall in love with this place if you saw it, but you can literally watch outbreaks where you start having attacks. We have heat maps, and because we're analyzing signals in real time, you can literally watch in real time when an area starts to have an outbreak because it just gets hot on the map, right? When you're dealing with this volume of data. Okay, so to put things in perspective, when you think about the threats, and I know this is no surprise to you all, this is my home network. Okay, that was data taken from this afternoon. Okay, not the chart on the bottom, but look at the left. I mean, that was over a period of what, an hour? UK, Paris, Amsterdam, Bolivia, Hong Kong, Netherlands, Germany. Okay. So, I heard somebody say, and that's why I put this one up here, I heard somebody talk about protecting the network. Okay. What you're going to find is, of course, it's important to protect the network. The trend is protect the data. And that's the assumed breach point I was making. So the big focus right now with all of the CISOs that I work with is I'm going to assume right now somebody's already in my network. I'm going to do my best to protect it. Okay. But I'm going to assume somebody's already in my network. So it's about protecting the integrity of the data. And that includes things like obviously confidential data, employee data, anything that's business sensitive, which also gets back to another important trend, which is about tagging and classifying data, right? It's important to classify impact of data based on breach. So you'll find a lot of the tools that, I don't know about the tools that you all are using now, but when we start talking about encrypting data, it's important to tag the data. And we do automatic classification. A lot of that's around AI. We use AI for automatic classification so that we know that if data is compromised, we immediately know what the business impact is. We want to know, is that a $100 million impact to the business? Is that a $1 billion impact to the business? Okay, so that's a whole nother area, that we talk about post-incident. And there is a bigger focus around that, I would say, and there are good investments around that when it comes to data classification. But let's talk about the phishing threat landscape. Now, does anybody want to guess why there was a big spike down there at the bottom last year? And by the way, the spoiler or, a clue is what's on the left. This was phishing emails with Ethereum wallet addresses. Okay. Anybody else? Yeah. I don't know if that was when NFTs got, the monkey NFTs and all those things. I'm not sure about that. I don't know if that was that time, but no, that's not the answer.
I remember this is a couple months after the Log4j thing, and all the crypto accounts thought they had like billions of dollars in them.
Yeah, believe it or not, this has literally zero to do with crypto. Okay. Anybody remember what Russia was doing at that time? They were invading Ukraine. Okay. This was phishing emails trying to solicit funds from people to support the cause in Ukraine. Okay. And obviously, if you donate money via cryptocurrency, you're not going to get it back and it's hard to trace. Okay. So there was a major phishing campaign that was launched to take advantage of the situation in Ukraine. Okay. So if you look at, and I'm not going to go into all the details on the right, but let's just talk about phishing emails blocked per week, 710 million. Okay, so that's what we block per week. We look at unique phishing URLs hosted outside of Microsoft. So I mentioned that our digital crimes unit works with governments from around the world. So last year we had 531,000 we'll call it malicious URLs taken offline through our digital crimes unit working with ISPs, governments, et cetera. And there's a reason why there's so many sites that are popping up now that are malicious in nature, and we're going to talk about that. It's become a business, okay? If you look at mean time it takes for an attacker to get to your private data from phishing, 1 hour and 12 minutes. Anybody want to guess how long it takes past that 1 hour and 12 minutes before they're able to move laterally within the organization? 3 hours? That's in it. So was that 30 minutes? Because it's 1 hour and 42 minutes. from the time it began. Okay. And by the way, from an insider risk perspective, it's more than 70 days before insider risk is typically detected using classical measurements. The good news is that's down about 110 days from what it was about 5 years ago. Used to be about a half a year. Okay, anybody want to guess what the estimated financial loss was in 2021 due to what we call BEC, or business compromised email? 500 billion? 2.4. Not quite, no, a little high. Yep. I actually had a CIO reach out to me because their CFO, their chief financial officer, received an email that appeared to be from somebody within the organization saying, quick, I need to pay this purchase order, pay this invoice for about $500,000. And because they knew the person, because the person that was masquerading was also an executive, they didn't think twice about paying the invoice. And $500,000 just walked out the back door in a matter of minutes. Okay, so it doesn't take long to get to 2.4 billion. Okay, so why principal issues leading to ransomware compromise? All right, so these are the reasons why, the main reasons why. At the bottom, I heard MFA mentioned earlier. Okay, but what do you think the number one reason is on here for ransomware? Over permissioned, yeah. Not least privilege, over permissioned, yeah. Yeah. So which column do we want to pick? Okay. There you go. It's lateral movement controls. So I told you I'd mentioned AI about this, or I was going to mention AI tonight. So identity is the biggest problem, right? Protecting identity, because you don't move laterally in a network usually, unless you are masquerading or you've compromised an identity. Okay. What is no longer a trend, and most CISOs hate this if you come and talk to them about this, is configuring thresholds, right? Oh, I need to set a threshold. Oh, if I get this many alerts, I need to worry about it, right? That doesn't work anymore. Hackers are too sophisticated. So now it's about behavioral fingerprinting, okay? So it's looking at endpoint to endpoint connections, identity based on machine identity, user identity. So, you know, in a Windows network, in a Unix network where you're using Kerberos, and you have, you know, machine identities, user identities, it's learning the behaviors of those endpoints and those accounts to know what common acceptable behavior is for those accounts, right? And then it's looking for abnormal behavior based on learned behavior, which is the machine learning side of this that we're talking about, okay? This is 100% the trend right now, because it's the only way that we can scale to meet this, okay? This is what I was talking about, why when we talk about those URLs that we've taken down, anybody heard cybercrime as a service? Pull out your credit card and go stand up as many phishing sites as you want now, okay? Now, granted, you're going to have to convert that to cryptocurrency because that's the only currency they accept. But there is what's called CAS now, which is cybercrime as a service. Okay, super easy for anybody, non-sophisticated attacker, to go basically buy into phishing sites. I could spend quite a bit of time on this, but what I'm showing there on the right, this is one of our investigations just to show when you start following the currency and where it goes and how it moves. I mean, these companies have gotten super sophisticated. Okay. DCU down there, by the way, is, if you hadn't put that together, that's our digital crimes unit. So 2.75 million site registration successfully blocked by DCU. All right, how much do you all talk about nation state threats?
Very little.
Very little.
Advanced persistent threats, briefly, but most of the stuff we do is simulated.
Okay.
So not much.
Yeah, this is the biggest threat right now. So, and there, I don't have them in here. If we've got time, I'll show you a couple of slides. But right now, this is all data-driven numbers or data-driven statements that I'm providing, and I can show you the slides. Korea, Iran, North Korea, Iran, China, and Russia are the top 4 malicious nation-state threats right now. And then what's more interesting, though, is to see where those attacks are actually targeted. Okay, and if we have time, I'll show you some of those slides. Interestingly enough, we classify nation-state attackers based on the periodic table. Okay, so I'm just showing you a top-level view, and the attackers we will assign a element name to. Some of this is because when we're talking in code amongst the DCU unit, we'll refer to not countries by name or bad actors by name, but by periodic table elements. But this is a 2020. I think this is a 2022 view. So this is where we saw the most activity last year. Okay. So let me we'll drill down into this a little bit. So when we look at nation state targeting of critical infrastructure, then there's the the industries that are targeted by nation state actors. So it shouldn't be any surprise. Information technology is the number one targeted, the number one target from nation state actors. That would be companies like, for example, Microsoft, AWS, GCP. Why is that? Well, because so many companies are in the cloud now, so it's a bigger target. It's a bigger opportunity, okay? So when you were talking about doing your cloud security this weekend, there's a reason why people are getting paid a lot of money for doing cloud security now, okay? It's because there's a high return on that investment, okay? If you look at, you look at the chart down there at the bottom, you can see, I mean, it would almost have a hockey stick in the last year. And a lot of that, again, is coming out of activities, world activities that I know you're very familiar with in Asia Pacific region. And, unfortunately, it's the nature of what we're dealing with right now. I'm assuming you all spending a good bit of time on IoT. No? Okay. All right. So talk briefly about this. IoT is probably one of the emerging larger threats because especially when we start talking about ML and machine learning, farming, agriculture, there is a significant trend. One of my customers is Florida Crystal Corporation that I work with. You all would know if you go down to South Florida, you see all the sugarcane fields, that's Florida Crystal Corporation. Okay. The drinks, the soda drinks that you're drinking, the sugar likely came from Florida Crystal. Okay. Agriculture has such a lean margin, and obviously with changing weather events, machine learning is almost becoming critical to them to be able to stay profitable. So IoT becomes important because they have to be able to measure things at a rate that machine learning is applicable, right? Unfortunately, when you look at what runs in IoT, it's firmware, okay? You all do firmware exploits, okay? I'm sure you've probably seen these types of statistics at the bottom then, okay? If you look at vulnerabilities that are 6 or more years old, I mean, the fact that there's 4% of the device firmware, and this is basically a sampling of the most common firmware that's out there. I mean, that's unfortunately, I mean, you look at solar wind, you look at a lot of the, you look at a lot of the embedded systems that are out there today, these things get abandoned, they get forgotten, if you can believe it. There's, hey, John or Sally was responsible for that. They left the company, but it just continued to work and everybody forgot about it for the last 5 years. That's a very common problem, okay? So let's talk about cyber influence. So remember we were talking about the ransomware attack in Ukraine. I'm sorry, that started because of the Ukraine effect. Okay, so let's talk about the Russia propaganda index. So I can't read it there. What's the first date on the left? Okay, so what is that, about 5 months before the phishing attack started in February? Okay, you notice what you can tell when you start to look at the signals. And by the way, governments are very well aware of this. I mean, we were aware of it. You can see that there is something in process. We weren't talking about it on the world stage. We weren't saying, hey, we were talking about, Russia's, sitting at the border. We could see the targeted propaganda campaign already starting, 5-6 months before the invasion in February actually started to occur. And then you see what happened right after the invasion. They really ramped up. It was the bioweapons plants in Ukraine, et cetera. So these are things that, at the digital crimes unit, and when you're working on the cybersecurity side, it's not just we're going after something if we're, a red team. It's also what are we looking for and what are we trying to predict based on all these other signals that we're seeing that, aren't necessarily vulnerabilities or, compromises or those sorts of things that lead up to these major events. Okay. So has anybody heard of this idea of synthetic media landscape? Oh, okay. Like I said, there's a lot of stuff that we could really go in deep on. So I'll boil this down for you. Okay, let me ask you a different question. Who hasn't heard of ChatGPT? Okay. All right. So, what is one of the things that, immediately, when ChatGPT became popular, well, what do we need to do? We need to figure out how to flag content created by AI. Okay. Basically the same thing here. What we're looking for are ways to tag and identify through AI authentic sources of information. Okay. So when propaganda campaigns start, it's almost like blockchain. Did you all study blockchain at all? A little bit? Okay. So, we talk about blockchain in the context of cryptocurrency a lot, but, blockchain for pharmacy, for legal records, it's about chain of custody. It's about being able to trace things back to a journal and an authentic source. That's what we're talking about doing with AI, so that when we have, there are media campaigns, you can at least flag whether or not something that is generated as, quote, media came from an authentic source and can be easily identified as whether or not it's true or it's propaganda, much like the Russian propaganda campaign that we were talking about in the previous slide. Okay, so this is an emerging area. All right. So identity. How much do you all talk about identity in terms of protecting identity? Obviously, we talked about MFA. I'm assuming this is a big focus of your exercises. Yeah. Everybody wants to go after the identity for good reason. Okay. Do you all talk about things like FIDO? No. I'm disappointed. UF, we're going to have a talk at the next IAB. Okay, so please, homework assignment, go read about FIDO 2. Okay, so FIDO 2 is the idea of passwordless. Okay, the industry as a whole wants to get away from passwords. Passwords are our Achilles heel. Okay, FIDO 2, FIDO keys. There are websites that accept FIDO keys. Okay, a FIDO key is a physical, in most cases, a physical key that you can use, just like you do to, a key to get into your house, a key to start your car. It's the ability to verify who you are without a password. Okay. Yep.
So this FIDO stand for something?
Mm-hmm.
What is this?
I'm gonna let you look that up.
I think the IT department gave out a small set of those NFTs and system keys where the other have,
Yep.
but I think they're they go throughout it, like students not having their own accounts, passwords, and stuff like that.
Right. Yeah, and a lot of FIDO keys have got biometrics built into the key too. So you still have a second factor that's built into the FIDO key. So you have to do a thumbprint or something on the physical key itself. But if how many of you know what Windows Hello is? Okay. Windows Hello under the hood leverages FIDO technology. FIDO is an open standard. Okay. There are websites that support FIDO authentication now. Okay. But the move is we need to get people away from passwords. Okay. So let me ask a question related to this thing, because since you all haven't talked about this, maybe I'll teach you all something tonight. So can anybody tell me, since you know what Windows Hello is, why is it more secure to have a really simple PIN on Windows than it is to ask a person for their password? Anybody? Yeah. Yeah, well, that's true. But let's just say you have a strong password. Okay. Why is it more secure for you to have a registered Windows Hello PIN instead of using your password to sign in? Because it seems counterintuitive. Yeah. They have to have physical access to your device. Yeah, that's one reason. Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, the short answer is they have to have physical access to the device, but the Windows Hello PIN is only good for access to that device. It has no network credential. Okay. So if somebody compromises your account, number one, they have to have physical access to the device. Number two, keylogger ain't going to do much good, in terms of compromising the network because the user's not entering their password. Okay. And the PIN is only good for access again to that local machine. Okay. This is the essence of where FIDO sort of comes in. Okay. Because what we want to do is get passwords off the network. It was a big healthcare. Everybody knows what LDAP is, I'm sure. Okay. Anybody want to tell me what LDAP is? This is a trick question, by the way. Yeah, no, but what is it? Why do we have LDAP? What's its purpose? I guess that's the better question. Yeah, why? Yeah, what? No, this is not a Windows question because LDAP has nothing to do with Microsoft or Windows. I mean, we support it in certain products, but why does LDAP exist? Yeah.
It just makes it easier / faster for accessing resources for different system services.
Absolutely wrong. No, but that's the misunderstanding, right? And unfortunately, this is the way that people implement it. LDAP was designed to be a directory lookup protocol, not an authentication protocol. Okay. And if you look at old routers, if you look at old switches, okay, they implemented LDAP with Radius for authentication. It was never designed for that because what's the other thing? Anybody ever looked at LDAP with Wireshark? Everything's in the clear, right? So that's why they had to come out with LDAP-S, right? Because people used it for what it wasn't intended. So then the router manufacturers had to get together and say, well, we can't change this because all this stuff's built on it, but we got to make it at least somewhat secure. Let's at least encrypt the passwords and the usernames that people are passing across the directory. So again, going back to, Kerberos is obviously a lot more secure, was what it was designed for. But back to the Dave slide, right? Passwords are the weakest link. So the industry as a whole wants to move away from passwords. FIDO is the way that we plan to do that. And if you want a good implementation of FIDO to mess around with Windows Hello. Right. Okay. So DDoS, y'all do any of these? Orchestrate any of your own denial of service attacks? Yeah. And as my son likes to point out, and and I will validate here, the gaming industry continues to be the top target. Right. So this is just more a fact slide to put up here. And interestingly enough, but no surprise, the United States is still the biggest target for DDoS attacks. Okay. Does anybody know what the first line of defense is for most companies against DDoS from external attack on public-facing assets? Okay, that's possibly one. Yeah, it's CDN networks. So if you look at Akamai, if you look at the old Verizon network, if you look at Azure CDN, this is one of the reasons that most of these companies put, besides the fact that it helps distribute the availability of content, they put CDN network or CDN services upstream from their network and their services in order to minimize the potential for DDoS packets on their own networks. Okay. All right. So I'm just going to build this out real quick because this is, I like to call this an eyesore chart. And I'm happy to share this. It's a bit dated, but this is a nice blueprint for what a well-built SOC would look like. Does this look a little more complicated than what you all would think? So, and I'll leave this behind because again, we could, this is a fun slide to talk about and to talk to. And, if you all are ever interested in diving into these things, we can. Do you all deal with tools like Splunk or Algorithm, other SIM tools? Yeah. You try to? Okay. All right. I probably give away asking the question. Who do you think makes the number one SIM tool in the world now?
I would love to say Microsoft, but if you weren't here, my guess would honestly be Amazon.
Yeah, it's Microsoft. Yeah. Do you all know what it's called? Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm bringing this up for a reason because you all would probably enjoy going out and reading about this because I think at the IAB we talked about MITRE frameworks and those sorts of things. So the Microsoft SIM tool is called Azure Sentinel, and within Sentinel there is there's actually a MITRE framework guide within Sentinel for all the operations that you do within SIM because it's also a SOAR tool. Do you all talk about SOAR tools at all? SOAR? Yeah, security operations automated response. So the idea is SIM tool is great to tell you when you got a big problem, if somebody's watching it, but companies don't like to pay people to sit around and watch screens now. That's a fact, right? So the idea is that in many cases, if you can shut things down, if you think about zero-day attacks, companies are investing in SOAR because they want at least those things that can be detected to be automatically responded to. Isolate, sandbox, quarantine, those sorts of things, based on telemetry coming into the SIM tool. All right. So I know we covered a lot of stuff there. I stayed, I couldn't go deep in a lot of that just because of the time that we've got. But questions, discussion, yeah. Mm-hmm.
That will obviously continue to be a problem for a while. If you look at other industries, really pharmaceuticals, right? You take an Advil and turn your screen into jelly, like you get to sue the pharmaceutical company. If you buy a car and the brakes don't work, you get to sue a car accident and manufacturing because the car company is liable. That's not really a pattern in software. Like you buy a smart fridge that runs bash when you put a URL parameter to something, and then like your office gets optimized for that. The person who made that smart fridge isn't.
It's because everybody checks that little box without reading the terms of service and terms of use. Mm-hmm.
what do you see as methods to hold these companies accountable for not shipping vulnerabilities and flaws?
We could get into. I'm more than happy to talk judicial law with you because unfortunately I spend a lot of time with attorneys at Microsoft. Unfortunately, the burden of proof is you have to prove negligence, deliberate negligence, right? And that is so hard to prove in software. It's like, oh, I deliberately wrote crappy code. No, I didn't mean to. It just, I sucked at writing code and I released some bad code, but I didn't mean to, right? And that's also why, it's important when we think about, are you all familiar with, I know we talked about ChatGPT and you all probably, if you don't know by now, OpenAI and Microsoft have been working together quite extensively the last 5 years. It started out with about $1 billion investment back in 2017, but there's another machine learning model called Codex, C-O-D-E-X. Are you all familiar with that? Okay. Anybody use GitHub Copilot? Okay. So there's a nice little tweet out there if you can go find it. It was a Tesla engineer that works on the AI side of the house, and he tweeted out in early January that he lets Copilot write about 80% of the code. He writes the other 20%. Okay, so go out and check out Copilot, but basically what it's doing is Copilot is learning coding best practices. Okay, and then as you're writing code based on what it looks like you're intending to do, it's actually suggesting code for you, right? So that's one way, because we can't, we're not going to fix this in the courts right now. What we can try to do is make developers write better code. And then, and I don't know if you all get into this area, but like automated code scanning, vulnerability analysis of code, and third-party tools for doing that. You all use like GitHub Advanced Security. So GitHub Advanced Security is every time you check in code, it does vulnerability analysis of the code when it's checked into a repo. Okay, and there's other tools out there that do this. Other third-party tools, but that's another big area because obviously when you look at injection attacks, we can, we're smart enough now that we can find, memory leaks and buffer overflows. We can predict those. AI is smart enough to predict that. So every time you check code in, you get automated scans that are coming back and saying, bad code, uncheck it, go back and fix this. So, to answer your question around that, we can try to make the developer smarter, but I'll tell you what we're doing now because, a lot of these devices that are out there, it's one thing to say, oh, I'm going to go sue that company. Some of these IoT devices, these companies literally exist for a few years and then they're gone, right? So there's nobody to go sue, but the companies depend on them. So they need the device. There might not be an alternative. So there is, are you all studying like hyper-converged infrastructure and what that means? Okay, so hyper-converged infrastructure is this idea that, you think about, think about the NVIDIA farm that you have sitting over here somewhere, right? Okay. Then you think about the servers that are sitting up in Azure that are running NVIDIA GPUs that are doing ML also. Okay, hyper-converged infrastructure are the capabilities that allow those two sets of capabilities to work together. Okay, so it's sort of marrying up the cloud with the on-premise piece, and there's a bunch of stuff around hyper-converged infrastructure. On the IoT side, there's a lot of investments around what's called edge technology. So edge are those things that sit on the edge of the network on-premise that are integration points to cloud. Okay, or they're integration points to, probably the easiest way they think of them as a proxy. Okay, there are, in Microsoft, for example, and there's other companies that have these, we're building IoT edge security services so that you then go take all these IoT networks, put them in a sandbox. And since we can't go secure the endpoint itself, why? Because we can't change the firmware, we can't change the software on it. We're going to secure the traffic into and out of that network based on IoT patterns. Okay, so that's the other way. That's the short answer to your question. Because unfortunately, suing is great, but it doesn't actually go resolve the incident you have. We want to stop it before it happens. And, you know, just like Visual Basic, there's just too many tools out there now, right now that make it too easy for people to write code. And there's just going to continue to be a lot of bad code. So. All right. Any other questions? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Very challenging right now. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's, well, there's not a short answer to that question. I don't have an accurate answer to that question. What I can tell you is that most of the computer science right now, so if we go back to the computer science side of it, look at it, a lot of it has to do with understanding the potential source of the content. So you mentioned Chat GPT 3. There's 3.5, okay? Did you all see the announcement that we made a couple days ago about Bing and Chat GPT, but it's not Chat GPT, it's called Prometheus, okay? So Prometheus is a new model, much like Da Vinci. There's a couple of Da Vinci models, there's a Chat GPT model, there's the Prometheus model. You got to know a little bit about the model to know what to look for, right? At least right now, that's as good as the science is, okay? And you start to learn things, right? And then they're spotting obvious stuff. You know, I like to, I've got buddies that, you know, work over at Google, and I've got buddies that work over at Amazon. So we like to, you know, poke each other now and then. So how many of you all have heard about Google Chad? Yeah, Chad, C-H-A-D. Yeah, so Google Chat is the one that they were talking about externally the other day. So the day after Microsoft's event, Google did a big event out of Europe to talk about Google Chat and them releasing that, and they asked it a question. They said, and my son knows because I actually posted something on LinkedIn. So if you all want to go to my LinkedIn and look me up, you can see what I posted, because I'm telling you all this, I didn't put it in there. I was poking the bear a little bit with my post, because I know some of my friends at Google that would look at it. So somebody asked Chad a question about the James Webb Space Telescope. They said, you know, what's something cool I could tell my 9-year-old son about the James Webb Space Telescope? So they asked Chad this question. He came back and said, well, the James Webb Telescope found the first exoplanet. Well, that's not exactly true. It was found by a European telescope back in 2004. So the answer to that question is, you know, if it's spitting out bad data, you might flag that as a potential, you know, because that is so far off from the truth. You might say, hey, you know, this is likely AI because it made a huge mistake. I mean, even a human wouldn't make this dumb a mistake, right? So there's things like that. I will tell you, Chat GPT is really good, okay, especially as long as we've been training it. But I can also tell you that internally, there's a project. I can't say it by name. I told you I'd be careful because certain things I can say, but there's an internal project that we're training Chat GPT into the Da Vinci models against a lot of our public-facing content. When you think about Azure and Power Platform and Modern Work and those things. I went in and was asking it questions, and I asked it to write some code, and it wrote some. I said, what did I say? I said, write some, you know, give me some app service code, or write me some sample app service code in JavaScript to expose an endpoint, blah, blah, you know, some stuff. And it spit out some code. First time it did a really good job. The second time it was really bad, right? And the point there is that, you know, you really have to train these models exhaustively to get that good that you start to ask yourself, did a person write this or did AI write this? And, you know, my personal opinion is it's going to be really hard. The smarter the models get, the more data we feed and train them with, to detect what is and what is not, you know, human originated. So. Mhm.
Website that was able to detect a hydrogen vectors, whether it's something like two, detection of the particular sequence of proteins that we use. Is there something that could similarly more complex
There was and I don't know who the person was that did it. There was somebody that claimed that they did something like that right after I think it's back in January with the 3.5 model, and they claimed, and they were using token sequencing and things like that, and they claimed it, but it wasn't 100%. And that's the problem, is that, if, to your point, they were trying to develop, they knew the source, right? They were trying to develop a detection model based on a source that was known, ChatGPT 2.0, right? But if you don't know the source and you don't have a baseline to compare against, right, it becomes increasingly more complicated to try to detect something that's AI versus not AI, right? And I think inherently that's going to be the problem. It was no, if you were watching, if you like to watch Congress, I mean, they were already talking this week about ChatGPT and, we got to start legislating this. And, something that will be good for you all to follow is because Microsoft is obviously very invested in OpenAI. And if you all know what OpenAI is all about, OpenAI is about ethical AI. I mean, that is at the base of their mission statement. There was Brad Smith, who was our chief executive of legal. There was an article that came out today about Microsoft and how we're going to look at ethical AI, what we are going to do, what we're not going to do. If you've ever messed around with Azure Cognitive Services, so this is things like facial recognition, voice imprinting, things of that nature, that we pulled back facial recognition. Does anybody know why we pulled facial recognition back? Yeah. So deepface is untrained learning. Facial recognition actually uses trained models, and that's a big difference. And that's part of what I'm hunting for. Yeah. What's
neural networks that are specifically made to match the model well, but have like some malicious output. For example, the input looks perfect to the human eye, but instead it does something malicious.
Yep. It has to do with how much, anybody in here taking any machine learning classes? Okay. So trained versus untrained models, you all talked about that. So why don't you tell the group real quick, what's the difference between the two? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So when you talk about deep fakes, those are untrained models. Okay. We're not going to get into that here because it's it's not a short topic to discuss. Train is a little bit easier to talk about. So here's the netted out. Everybody take probability and statistics. Okay. That's what trained models are all about. It's about standard deviation. Okay. And the idea of a trained model is you build a neural network based off of, so let's say I've got 1 million data points. Okay. I'm going to feed 750,000 of those data points in and build a model, okay, a probability model. What I'm looking for is a model that when I feed the other 250,000 data points into the model that I built, that within a certain deviation that I say is acceptable, I get the predicted output. I know the number that I should get. I held back data from the model. Okay, so here was the problem with facial recognition. Anybody, you all talk about unconscious bias at all? Okay. Yeah, so unconscious bias is what happened. So when you look at the people that were training the models and the sources that we use, guess what? It was really good at detecting without false positives or false negatives Caucasians. It was really bad at false positives with ethnic and minority groups. Why? Because the data sets that were available and used were not large enough to effectively train the model. And when they were testing the output, they were training the output on what they had the most data of, which was video that was, centric around Caucasians. So the FBI, the NSA, there were a lot of other agencies that were interested in using our cognitive services and facial recognition for obvious, use cases. And when we started finding out that there was this inherent bias, we said, no, this is not good ethical use of this technology because of the large number of false positives that are getting created based on certain populations.
I remember several years ago, Google Photos had an issue with they were tagging Black people as gorillas or something.
Mm-hmm.
There was a huge scandal about
yeah.
that.
Yeah, and that 100% goes back to how well the model was trained and what data sets it was used to train against, right? Untrained models is the ability in some of the apps that you have to go upload my photo and I get back an animated version or my face on the top of another. It doesn't have to train against a set of data. It's called an untrained model, right? It's a whole different, there's a whole other track on computer science that we could talk about around untrained models. The most common models that are used are trained models because they have the most application in business. And by the way, the trained models that we're talking about, the one that we're talking about in cybersecurity, is behavioral analysis. So we're training a model based on patterns that we're seeing on the network, based on patterns that we're seeing on user behavior on devices, and then we're looking for deviations that fall outside the patterns that have been defined. So my encouragement is study machine learning, understand AI, because it's going to be a big part of cybersecurity in the next few years, more so than it already is.
Do you think that these threat actors could potentially use the AI to trick out your behavioral analysis?
Well, it's the arms race, right? I mean, what's the biggest fear right now? It's quantum, right? Because quantum has the potential in certain applications to process much faster than standard computational, algorithms. So when we think about machine learning today, it's based on ones and zeros, right? It's based on programming on computers that use ones and zeros. So everything that we're doing is based on current architecture. Quantum, especially with cryptography, has the ability to run at exponentially thousands of times faster. So there's the arms race, right? And if you, do you all know who the largest nation state investor is in quantum? Any idea? China, which is why during the Trump administration, there was a executive order that was then, it was updated, and Biden, I want to say sometime last year, a very large sum of money that was targeted to the NSA and the NSF for quantum investments for national security, because there is a perceived significant threat that all these things that we're doing right now are going to basically be antiquated when we figure out how to attack them with quantum computing. So, yeah.
You were talking about the top threats. The U.S. of which nations targeted campaigns. So if Huawei or Xiaomi is giving a presentation right now, where, I don't know if you have this information, where would the U.S. rank on their list of?
Yeah. I don't think we disclose that information. Yeah, I mean, that one would be a good one to debate, because I don't think there's you know, I mean, all we have to think of, probably the best assumed example would be the nuclear power plants in Iran. Okay. I mean, nothing happened. They shut down. Why? I mean, we know that the computers were compromised. Now, there's a lot of debate. Well, was it US or was it Israel? Right? I mean, it was probably both, because, and I work with, matter of fact, as a team I may be managing soon, cross my fingers, a group of security architects, and one of them just joined us from the NSA. And, he's got a gag order on some of the things that he can talk about, but some of the things that he's alluded to that they were doing at the NSA, absolutely. There is infrastructure that we go after remotely, but then it's a question of, and all you got to go back is look at this, the Edward, Snowden files and things like that. It's like, can it be inferred or assumed that, the things that we're doing are 100% with good intention? Well, you'd like to think so. It's the US, but, everybody can debate that one for a long time. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
A lot of code that is on the internet is like what prevents those ones and generating those.
Yeah. I can only speak for Codex and so Codex is the model for learning and writing code. Okay. If you look at Copilot, so Copilot is something that companies subscribe to. There are ways to scope that model. And that model might be, I only want the model to learn from my coders, right? I only want it to learn from my patterns, right? So now you assume that you've got good developers, right? But that's why we augment that with controls like automated security scanning of code at check-in, right? So you can sort of see where the trend is going here, right? It's like Satya Nadella, our CEO, was speaking at the World Economic Forum a week and a half or 2 weeks ago. And, the way that we think about AI is not replacing humans, okay? It's the way that we branded GitHub. It's a co-pilot, right? The idea is that it takes away the things that we really don't need to be spending as many cycles on, and allows us to focus on the harder problems, right? The AI will eventually get smarter, but we'll get smarter too, right? But the idea is that AI just speeds up the work that we're doing. And, if I was going to call a spade, it's because every company wants more output for every dollar they invest in employees, right? So this is one way of achieving that. Okay, which unfortunately too, depending on the economy, 7,000 people fired from Dell, 10,000 people fired from Microsoft, 15,000 or something from AWS. I'm just talking about like the last month and a half, which the good news for you all is, as long as you graduate from here with good grades and you learn something and you land in the right job and you stay close to the output of the company. That's how I've stayed at Microsoft 22 and a half years. I've watched a lot of people come and go. But, a lot of it was B team stuff, right? And a lot of the people that you're seeing, exit a lot of these companies now, and I hate to say it, are, B team. We ramped up, and I'll sort of leave you with this sort of parting comment. What happened in 2008, 2009 in the United States? What was the big economic event? Housing, okay. Anybody watched GDP and inflation for the last 13 years? And the Fed rate? What's the Fed rate been for about the last 10 years? Fed lending rate. Anybody study central banks and how central banks work and those sorts of things? Yeah, central banks, the central bank is who lends to each of the banks, because everybody goes and puts their money in the bank. That little sign on the door that says FDIC insured up to $200,000, because banks are required to hold a certain amount of money in cash to cover accounts. Okay, if they fall below that threshold, they have to borrow money from the central bank. That's the lending rate. Okay, that lending rate has been almost 0% since about 2011. Okay, that's why we're in hyperinflation now. But for your group and for those in their mid-30s, what have you all experienced for the last 12, 13 years? Hyper growth in the United States, competition for salaries. You know, spend a year at Microsoft, jump to Google, jump to AWS every time, get a 20% raise. Those days are gone, right? The good news is, if you're good at your job, though, and you actually learned something, and you didn't just jump, you know, every time you sort of got yourself into a corner because you didn't really know what you was doing. It was just easier to go find another job somewhere else and tell them you were great and get more money. You'll have a good career in front of you, right? But you're entering that economy, or you're entering the economy at a point that is sort of at the tail end of that boom. And a lot of people that, you know, I mentor a lot of people at Microsoft. A lot of them are in their early 30s, and that's all they've known. This is like a big upset thing. Oh my gosh, you know, this is terrible. No, you know, I'm not old, but I'm not young by any measure. You see this, right? And I've just been watching it from the sidelines and watching people jump jobs and come in and go out. And again, a lot of them were B team. You know, they were there long enough for the company to figure out they didn't know what they were doing. But, you know, unfortunately, you know, I don't know if you all know this or not, but when one company wants to call another company to verify employment, that's literally the only thing by U.S. labor law they can do. They can't say you were great. They can't say you sucked. They can't say why you were terminated or why you left, if you left on your own terms. So it's important, and employees know this, right? They can go and they can make up whatever stories they want when they go to the next employer. That ride's over, right? Like I said, most of these people that you're seeing exited now, you know, it was just a matter of time. So, but my University of Florida education has served me very well. So just keep your razor sharp. Don't get complacent. That's the big thing. So. All right. All right. So meet expectations. Learn anything? Yeah. Good. Okay. Yeah. Again, I didn't, you know, I was struggling a bit because and you had sent me like what you all talked about last week, and I'd love to get up here and open up the Azure portal and we go into Sim Tools and we could set up, you know, firewalls and, you know, NSGs and things like that. But I was like, oh, studying what you do and, you know, what's exciting. But, you know, if there are, and I'm happy to come back at some point in the future if you all want, but if there are specific cloud topics that you all want to dig into on the cybersecurity side, we can definitely go deep in some of those. So, yeah. Okay. It doesn't sound like they're teaching you those over here. Yeah. Oh, I've brought it up, just like I brought up the fact that, you know, I don't know why you guys are using Zoom and not Teams, because the university is fully licensed for Teams. Yeah, why not use some of that money to pay for a service that we don't need? Yeah, so that's all right, because Zoom laid off a bunch of people yesterday. So I think it was 3% or something like that. Yeah, I got friends over at Zoom too, so I can say that. Okay. Oh, you're very welcome.